Okay, I think we can start. So, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, and I'm very excited to welcome you to this third webinar of the joint Clean Cooking Alliance and Mix webinar series, focusing on putting users at the heart of clean cooking. My name is Aina Petrolitite. I'm a research associate at Mix, and I will be moderating today's session. So today I would like to introduce Matt Sloan, who leads the User Insights Lab at the Clean Cooking Alliance and who will be presenting today. And you will hear from him shortly. Just a bit of housekeeping. So your microphones are on mute, and please use the chat to write any questions that you have during the session. So during today's session, Matt will be launching the User Insights Labs People Insights portal. So it's a dedicated website that displays research findings in an engaging and bite-sized way. Matt will share some of the highlights from the research that he and his team did in Nairobi with electric pressure cooker users. Where they spend time in homes and households to learn about people's cooking needs, behaviors, and they were also observing meals preparations. All the insights that came from that ethnographic study. So I will lead the Q&A later in the session, and please, add any questions in the chat box that you have. So Matt, without further ado, I will hand it over to you.
Wonderful, thank you, Anna, and thank you for the introduction. And it's great to have so many people who have dialed in. So thank you for giving us an hour. And yeah, I look forward to taking you through the to the People's Insights portal. So I want to cover three things in the next hour. I would like to introduce you to the User Insights Lab very briefly. So I lead the User Insights Lab at the Clean Cooking Alliance, and I just want to explain a little bit about what we do and kind of our purpose in the sector. I'll then touch on the electric pressure cooker study that we did at the back end of last year in Nairobi. I'm going to touch then next on the UILs, people data vision. And the reason I'm doing that is that whilst we're launching the portal today, there will be other things down the line, and I would just like to kind of whet everyone's appetite around other things that are coming kind of later in the year and early next year. And then finally, and the most important part of the session is to take you to the portal. And fundamentally, I want to help you get the most out of the portal. So after we've had the session today, it's something you feel familiar with, and I hope you will get the most from. So the User Insights Lab. As I say, I lead the User Insights Lab. We're a small team, and we have consultants in various African markets, and we exist to support clean cooking organizations to ultimately help them deliver more value to customers, because we want their customers to use the clean cooking appliances and products more. And we also recognize that there's a cost to finding new customers, there's a cost to putting an appliance in someone's home and then the person not using it. So actually, this is ultimately about getting rich data from consumers and customers, and then really pushing that right through to knowledge sharing, such as in this format, new ideas and ideas of how to change products, customize marketing. And ultimately, we're really focused on sparking an industry and a cultural shift. And that final objective is quite a big and ambitious one, but ultimately I really want everyone to kind of know that that's what we're about. We're about taking things as far as we can, and ultimately then it's over to the companies to make the changes. So the study itself, we spoke to 4 organizations. You'll see their logos in the bottom right. We spoke to them back in early 2024 rather, and it was really interesting because we heard that whilst in some cases they can collect data from usage, which is really great to hear, they have a lot of questions, or they had a lot of gaps in terms of understanding, well, what are people using their electric pressure cookers to, what meals to make? Why are they using them on certain days of the week and not others? They were very keen to have insights that they could act on. So the feedback was, look, the insights that we get are pretty good, but actually the easier you make out, the easier you package the insights, the better you package the insights, the easier it is to implement. So we were very, very set on making that a big part of it. We heard that within functions in these organizations that there's often internal debates in internal meetings. Sometimes there's just a need for a single data point or there's a single question. So we were very keen in the outputs to make the outputs applicable to all sorts of different stakeholders in different functions. And of course, those stakeholders do want the insights packaged in different ways that work for their functions. So someone sitting in product or design would want a different level of information to, let's say, somebody sitting in marketing or someone sitting in engineering. In terms of who participated, we had 21 participants. They lived in urban and peri-urban Nairobi. Everybody owned a pressure cooker, and there was a smattering of customers from some of those companies and others. We had a mixture of light and heavy users. And just to give you a sense, the typical household income was between 10 and 20,000 Kenyan shillings. And there's just some examples on the slide of some of the jobs that people we spoke to had. So I do want to touch on the methodology because I think it's quite important. In terms of how we ran the research, so we did what's known as ethnography light. So this involves visiting a participant's home, and actually the visit itself is around 2.5 hours, but it's split into a series of phases, and this is very deliberate. So initially, we had a discussion, and I've put the living room because it was often the living room, but it wasn't always. And here we are trying to understand that household context. We're trying to understand how the household cooks on a daily basis, and we're getting very specific. And we're also asking about appliances that they have owned, cooking appliances, other appliances, just to get a sense of their motivations around purchasing, amongst other things. But we're really trying to build a picture of that individual household and treating it on its merits. We then would typically migrate to the kitchen and move across to the kitchen, and we would, with the participant, get an overview of the kitchen and specifically where items are placed, why they're placed in certain places, and then the final part was the meal prep and the meal itself. So we typically arrive 2 hours before the meal, and then we would actually observe all steps of meal preparation. So this included chopping the ingredients. This included using the appliance, the electric pressure cooker rather, and then just seeing how the meal all came together. So an amazing opportunity to just get really deep and really rich with these 21 individuals. And at the end of it, we have produced a report. So this will be available. This is a report that was presented to the 4 companies earlier this year, and we're calling it Lifting the Lid on Household Cooking in Kenya. So what I want to do now is just touch on five human truths, as I refer to them, that we learned from that study. The first one then is that cooking blends the practical task of managing resources with being an act of care, identity, and respect for tradition. So when I say managing resources, this is deciding what food to buy. This is buying the food. This is thinking about fuel consumption, energy consumption, a whole range of factors. But what's fascinating is they're important, but they're not in isolation. There's other factors that play a role in how people think about the meals to prepare, what they prepare, and the decisions they make on that journey. Weekday cooking is often about speed, convenience, and I would say budgeting plays a bigger role, whereas weekends tends to be bigger gatherings. It might be the whole family, it might be the extended family. Tradition seems to play a much bigger role there in terms of people's expectations from their wider family of how dishes should be prepared. Yeah, just in terms of budgeting, it's a hugely important thing for all of the participants. But actually, for those in the informal sector, this was very interesting. How they may go without any income for 3 weeks, and then they may have an intense period of informal work, and actually as a result, they have to be very flexible with their appliance stack, because once the fuel prices change or the availability changes, they are really in trouble. So we thought that was quite interesting, understanding those dynamics. In the picture to the left, you will see that ugali is being prepared on the gas cooker. So this was a meal that was largely being prepared in the electric pressure cooker, which is the image to the right. But what was very interesting was the ugali was prepared on the gas cooker. And when we asked, well, why wouldn't you prepare it? Have you ever considered preparing it in the pressure cooker? The person said, well, it would be quite difficult to do that just because of the nature of turning the bowl. And then they also made this point that actually they would be judged in terms of the ugali not being prepared kind of traditionally and not having that smoky taste. And so, and then when we sort of dug down a few layers deeper, it was really interesting that they would never consider doing this in the electric pressure cooker. So I think this is a really nice example of a meal coming together, but actually the role that the tradition and wider expectations play. Second human truth I wanted to mention is that electric pressure cookers are frequently layered into existing meal routines, as well as being used as the sole or single appliance in meal preparation. So when we were with the 21 participants, we actually noted down across the last 7 days, we noted down every single meal they prepared, the appliance they used, in fact, every characteristic of that meal. And actually, when you look across those 400 and something meals, 450 meals, I believe, 30% of those meals involved just the pressure cooker. 29% involved the pressure cooker and typically the gas cooker or the GCO. And quite interestingly, 41% did not involve the pressure cooker at all. And it's worth saying that in the meals where the pressure cooker was not involved, this was, for example, they were cooking chapati, they were making a meal for a much bigger group of people, and the capacity of the pressure cooker is such that it's difficult to change the size of the pot. And so it's really interesting just understanding those characteristics of the meals that were not being used or not being considered for the pressure cooker. If we just focus on the pressure cooker, though, we actually saw that there were two very consistent, what we call jobs to be done with the pressure cooker. So for those who are new to the phrase, jobs to be done is this idea that people hire, they buy, but they hire an appliance to do a job to actually deliver an outcome. And so we asked people to take us back to when they were considering or when they purchased appliance, they made the decision to buy the appliance, and then reflecting on usage since. And it's very interesting that two jobs that were universal was this expectation and I've got to say this delivery of being able to cook quickly, specifically for hard cereals and weekday meals where time's at a premium, and also to free up time, which is interesting because it's a subtle difference. This concept of freeing up time is this idea of set and forget. And typically it manifested with mothers who had younger children and they didn't want to be in the kitchen whilst the younger child was left by themselves. So they said it was amazing how that they got the opportunity to be with their children rather than in the kitchen with the pressure cooker. So yeah, we found that pretty interesting. I'm just going to show you a few pictures of the meals themselves. So for breakfast, there's a lot of variation across the 21. For breakfast, we saw that the pressure cooker was very commonly used for sweet potatoes. It was commonly used for a combination of boiling water for tea or actually making the tea itself. It was common to boil eggs, and there were a few other kind of isolated scenarios. So it was used a little bit for breakfast, I would say. It was used very often for lunch. For lunch, whole range of things, commonly used to prepare rice, to prepare beans, and in some cases to cook githeri. So yeah, I would say when it was being used by itself, it was often for breakfast or for lunch. And then in the evening, actually, it was very often it was used with other appliances. So it's quite commonly used with a gas cooker. And this is really interesting because I think often this might not be how we think about appliances when they're purchased. It's how they live with other appliances, how they live within that kitchen context. So that was really interesting, just seeing that interplay and seeing how you might, as somebody who is selling and distributing electric pressures, how might you kind of help the household out? So it was really interesting observing that and thinking that through. Okay, third thing I wanted to mention is the personas. So what we observed in the households, and we do want to validate this with quantitative research, is we actually observed 6 personas, and the way that we've looked at this is around the kind of mindset and primary motivation around cooking. And this came from that upfront conversation, that 45 minutes, just understanding around the thought process when cooking and the thought process both at a meal level and overall. And we've actually set these out from left to right. The left it's more functional, and then on the right it's more, arguably it's more emotional. And it's quite interesting, the kind of spectrum, because actually what you see across the 21 people is no person was just one. Quite a few people were time conscious, convenience seeking, and budget minded, depending on the occasion, depending on who they were cooking for. And then people who typically, I would say, is people who, when we asked about their passions and their hobbies, they said cooking is one of my passions. And actually, we found that those people tended to have more of an experiential kind of cooking kind of side to them, sometimes at the weekends when they've got a bit more time, or they talked about the kind of nurturing side of cooking as well. So we thought this was quite interesting, because I think often when we look at an appliance, we think, oh, they'll all be using it in the same way, and most people, would probably cook with that the same way. And actually, I think this is quite interesting, because this shows there's just lots more diversity than that point of view might expect. When we were actually in the kitchens themselves, so we had that 45-minute to an hour period with the household cooks, we did observe a number of challenges. Some of these were actually were mentioned in discussion before, but what's very interesting is often they weren't. And I think this is where the power of observation is very, very interesting, because, for example, when you'll see this, the picture is quite small, so sorry for that, but in the top left, that's actually part of the field work. That's the discussion with Janet, the researcher, and our participant. And you can see there that the pressure cooker is actually sat on a little seat, and this is actually in the living room. This is not in the kitchen. And when we probed around this is because the socket in the kitchen was either weak or it was unreliable, and actually there wasn't really a space in the kitchen for it either. But this is quite interesting, because in some of those meals where you might need to use the pressure cooker and another appliance, and this person had a cocoa stove and a gas cooker, you can imagine how challenging that would be, having them in different parts of the house. So that's quite interesting. Sometimes it was actually the sheer fact that the cord was not long enough, so they had to place the pressure cooker in the room that it would just enable them to set it up in some way. We saw at the bottom, you'll see four pictures. This is actually 4 different participants, and this is 4 of the 21. And actually, it was amazing how much they struggled with the lid. So this is a pressure cooker where the lid actually fully comes off. Some of the pressure cookers we saw, it was on a hinge, but it was quite fascinating that you can imagine as a participant, or you can imagine as a user, for the first couple of times, and you're struggling to actually close the lid back on. There's quite a lot of anxiety using it for the first time and hoping you're doing it the right way. But you can imagine as you're closing it and it basically not being able to close. And people did say that it was a source of stress because they didn't want to break it. This was a big deal. People purchasing this and making this kind of purchase commitment, and actually they were very nervous about spoiling it or breaking it. And the nature of the device and the pressure, they were obviously also concerned about it exploding, because I think half of the participants made reference to a manual pressure cooker that a couple of years ago in Nairobi kind of exploded. I think it made the front page of a lot of the newspapers, and that has had a kind of cast a shadow in terms of perceptions around manual pressure cookers. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of mention those two. Okay, and then the final, let's call it a kind of overall insight, is this idea of learning and mastery. So we did ask people, how did you learn to use the appliance? And I mean, it was very good to hear that so many people saw or were given a demonstration and they felt really good about those demonstrations. So that was really, really nice to hear. However, where no demonstration was given, the top picture on the right there, that's the manual. It's on the outside of the box. So you can imagine if you're using the pressure cooker and you've got to sort of balance the box as you're cooking, how challenging that would be. And then a lot of the words on this page are really a reflection that people said, look, actually the manual, if it stopped working, if there's a random code on it, I would go to the manual, but I wouldn't want to use the manual to really learn how to use it. And then when we pushed them a bit deeper on this, they really felt that it's a very new way of cooking, and actually they really want to feel confident. They want to feel like they're doing it in the right way. And so this idea that you would just almost interpret it through a manual was something that I think people were quite strongly against. But I think also it's this desire to learn from other people, learn from people who are great. And I know that there's some amazing work in the sector. I know there's some amazing YouTube channels as well. But this is just of the people we kind of spoke to and when they were reflecting on it. So that's kind of a smattering of the bigger things. It's worth saying that on the portal, there is a lot, and there are a lot of different perspectives. And it's worth saying that when we did the research, we took photos, we took some video, and we have a full transcript of the discussion. But actually, we were very keen to take that information, take those insights, and package them into different formats for different audiences. So some of these terms, I'm sure, will be new to people on the call, but when we go to the portal, I'll kind of take you through some of them. But the idea here is to really pull apart this kind of mindset, and to really build that empathy that helps us understand what people are going through when they're using these products, when they're thinking about buying the appliance and taking it into their home for the first time. Because I think ultimately it's not just for everyone on this call, but I think everybody in the organizations that you work for, you should then really feel like you're in that household. You really feel like that what these people are kind of going through on that journey of usage and mastery. Okay, so without further ado, the People Insights portal. I mentioned I would touch on our data vision. This is just a single page, but I think it's so fundamental to how we see things. I really wanted to touch on it in this webinar. So we do have a research report that we've created. It's around 100 pages, and will be downloadable. And there's lots of research reports in the sector. A lot of the research reports are quite text heavy. This is very visual, but it's still a static document, and I think it still requires quite a bit of focus to read through. And so our perspective, our insight is, look, how can we make this information much more digestible? How can we make it more like you would filter numerical data? But crucially, how do we keep the interpretation in there? So what we were never planning to do was just put all the photos and transcripts on and say, kind of over to you. We wanted to marry this kind of interpretation power with this kind of ability to filter and look through things. So that's what I'm going to take you through in a second. And then just on the future, so something that the lab is working on and has been working on for a while is having firstly a smart library. So this would be an area that holds the research that we've done, but also other research artifacts from the sector. And then the thinking or the idea is that you would be able to go in and ask questions about research. And so this would use some AI, and actually you'd be able to ask questions and it would give you a bit of a synthesis. We also are looking at this idea of chatting with qualitative data, so chatting with transcripts. And then finally, the little green logo you can see there, which is VAPI. We're actually looking at using trialing the use of a voice bot in English and Swahili. So that's quite interesting as well, just kind of working through how that works in practice in the field, and some of the pitfalls, but also some of the opportunities that gives us. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that before I get deep into the portal. Okay, so the portal name, it is important to us. We often see in the sector, in fact, we often see in consumer society references to users and consumers, and we were very keen for this to be about people and about understanding people in the fullest, most holistic sense. So we were very keen that it didn't have either of those two words in there. And this is really to help build empathy. This is really about thinking beyond just the usage of the product and thinking about how the people that we hope will use these clean cooking products, how they live their lives and how they fit, and how their worldview is and their filters. The portal itself then is split into a series of filters. So I will actually go into it, but you can see, hopefully you can see my mouse moving around, but you will see here that at the moment we just have the one study, Nairobi and electric pressure cooker, but actually we've split the artifacts into 4 areas: the problem space, personas, the current solution, and the future solution. And that's very deliberate to split problem space with solution, because we believe that going deep and really understanding the world that the person lives in is fundamental. And then when we really understand that and feel what they're going through, actually it's a great opportunity to then go deep into the solution rather than the shortcut, which is just looking at the solution. And then I mentioned right at the start about future solutions. So we are incredibly passionate about taking things as far as we can. And so under the future solution filter, you will actually see some napkin sketches, and you will actually see some recommendations that we've made around design, marketing, communications, and etc. And often research sometimes does speak to that, but we feel like it's something that we really want to do because we know it so well. The portal, final slide before I get to the portal. The portal is all about user centricity. So it's user centricity for everybody on this call. So we share human truths, we share understanding, and we really put you in the homes and living rooms of the people in the portal. But also it's got a very focused practitioner side to it. And what I mean by that is we've really thought about the functions that we believe would interact with the human data, what would they want, how would they want to go about it, and we actually mapped the artifacts to those portals, to those functions rather. And I mentioned about this splitting the problems to the solutions. That's something we heard is quite important. So it's something that's part of the design. And I've got to say, finally, we have made it fairly straightforward for us to update. So my experience, having worked in research and doing this kind of thing for a long time, is if you put a lot of effort into something, but it's quite bespoke, it can then be very challenging to update. And actually, we've made this very seamless to update. You still have to do the research and the report, but actually, once we have all of that and that's packaged as it needs to be, it's actually fairly straightforward to then make those changes. So yeah, it's all about deeply understanding people and then fundamentally making that understanding easy to access and hopefully easy to act on. And that's just a slide that maps the artifacts to the various functions. I just wanted to kind of make the point here that fundamentally different functions have different needs, and we recognize that. So we're not saying every function needs to read everything. We're kind of splitting it out. Right, I will just hop to the portal itself. So I'll just stop sharing and I will look at the portal. So hopefully everybody can see the Clean Cooking Alliance homepage.
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you for letting me know. So on our homepage, if you go to sector resources and click on People Insights Portal, I do have it open just in case that didn't work, but it does, which is fantastic. You will see our People's Insight Portal. So I did give you an overview of these filters, but this is really where your kind of navigation is. So within the problem space, we have research details, many of which I've spoken about, but here you can see, for example, which electric pressure cooker brands we saw, and then what you do is you untick and you will just going to have to move the little chat because there's a little reset button in the far right, but essentially there's a reset button that can bring you back to every single tile if you ever get lost. But what I was just going to do was I was just going to select what is cooking, and what you'll see is we just pick up the tiles that relate to what is cooking. And sometimes people say, oh, what is cooking? That's a very broad question, but actually this is really powerful because in this section, we are really understanding what cooking means from the household's perspective, and it's in their words. So there is interpretation, but I would say there's quite light interpretation. And actually, for example, with what is cooking, we can see that there's this functional aspect, there's this cultural aspect, there's this emotional aspect to it. And as I say, we've been keen to keep it in their words as much as we can. We've just put a framework around it. Within the problem space, we also have what we call cognitive maps. So this may be new to people, but the idea of the cognitive map is to represent a single individual's worldview. And so you have in the center a central theme. And so this comes from the discussion, the transcripts, and everything we heard whilst we were there. And what you see are the tensions that exist in that person's kind of mind, and essentially the trade-offs they're making and having to make. The size of the green circle is a reflection of how often it was mentioned, because we asked people the same questions that you can then actually compare across the cognitive maps. So this is quite a powerful way of, I would say, more than anything, building empathy, because you see the language of the individual, but fundamentally you see the trade-offs that they're making, and hopefully you, as a result, really understand when they might get frustrated by something. You say, oh, okay, well, I get that, because actually they're trading off. And in the case, for example, of somebody who has a young family and is also working and their husband is working, time is incredibly important. And if things don't work or if things break down, that's a huge issue because they have no ability or they have seemingly no time to resolve that. So we think this is a really powerful way of building that empathy around the kind of challenges that people face and the way that they navigate their days. A day in the life. So we didn't do as many as we hoped, but we did some self-ethnography. So this is where we were working with people and they were actually directly messaging us and telling us about their days in a lot of detail. So a good example, and sorry, it's very small, but I would love people to go and read this themselves. This is a diary by one of the participants. And what we know reading through this was actually, this is an emotional journey. This isn't a static state of mind. This is actually a series of ups and downs, a series of hopes and dreams at some points, and then challenges that really you can feel in the words that they've used, how deflating it is. And so I won't necessarily go into lots of detail, but you'll hopefully be able to see here, for example, that the two peaks in this person's day are around the meal times, and actually their working day or their daytime is quite challenging. And you see how the day kind of starts well and then it gets challenging, but then they actually have a breakthrough and then they come back down again, and then it's kind of positive towards the end. And we just think this is a really powerful way of thinking beyond this idea that someone's day is kind of a constant, and actually it's there's quite a lot of variety in it. So that's the problem space. The personas, I did touch on the personas. I did mention the 6 personas. And what I'm going to do now is I'm not going to go into lots of detail on them because there's lots of detail on the pages of the personas, but I did just want to kind of touch on the ability to compare personas. The tables are the best way to do it, unfortunately, because you can just see everything in a single snapshot. And what we have done here is we have taken 5 dimensions or 5 aspects, and we've looked across the different personas just so it's very clear. For example, time conscious and convenience seeking sign maybe on the surface sound quite similar, but actually it's hopefully then very clear when you compare it like this, how they are subtly different. And more than anything, when you look at some of these motivations, cooking behaviors, when you are then speaking, if this is the nature of your job, when you're then speaking to people, you say, oh, I think they sound a bit more like a time-conscious cook, or they sound a bit more like that. And so this should help you, as you're speaking to people, understand, where they may sit and therefore how they may be intrinsically motivated. For those that are interested in jobs to be done, and I did mention it briefly earlier, and if you're not familiar with it, it's a fantastic way of understanding customer needs. So customer needs is often a very challenging area to get specific on, but actually this is a really structured way of going deep into an individual's functional, emotional, and social needs, and therefore you get very, very specific in the words that they would use or the words that they would come to their mind. And I would say in particular, this is really powerful for product design, and this is really powerful for marketing. So that's the personas one. Just to give you an idea of the detail of a persona, so convenience seeking, we've got a couple of images to the left that depict that individual, and then we have a quote on the page, and we have a little bit more about them. And as I say, I think this is particularly powerful for people who are charged with finding new customers, or who are trying to understand, okay, this person's not using that much, or maybe they're more like this. So this is an attempt to give a lot of precision to each of the segments. And so hopefully people can then identify. A good task is to identify which ones you individually feel like you fit most in. So that's those two. Current solution. So I'm just going to touch on a few of these. Appliance transition journeys. So this is a simple visual of the appliance acquisition journey. So many people, in fact, over half of the people we spoke to started with either a Gico or a gas cooker, and then you see how that's transitioned. So predominantly gas cooker owners have transitioned to EPC, whereas 1 or 2 have transitioned from, in fact, it's just 1 from a Gico, whereas typically people are transitioning from a Gico to a gas cooker. So hopefully this is helpful again, for those who are charged with identifying households that could be good candidates for transitioning to an EPC, actually you can see here that those who have a gas cooker are often good candidates for transitioning to an EPC. And you can see here that in some cases people had either a third appliance or a fourth appliance. That's just a simple view there. Rhythm of the week is probably one of the big parts of the analysis, the whole study. So the idea fundamentally of the rhythm of the week, this is taking the 7 days of the week, the 3 meals, and then for every person, we characterize each of those meals, looking at the appliance, looking at the meal prep, looking at who was there. And it just ensures that we don't ever generalize or make assumptions about a person. We're actually grounded in the day-to-day reality of how they cook. And then it ensures that when we understand that they are maybe using multiple appliances, we can really see why. And if we want to increase their usage, or if our goal is to increase their usage, we've got a much more precise way of seeing how they cook and maybe where our appliance could kind of fit in there. So I won't click on them, but I have within this chapter, we actually have some examples of some of the meals we saw. So I mentioned at the high level breakfast, lunch and dinner, but we actually have a step-by-step series of photos here of meat, stew and ugali, and pilau and meat. So you can kind of take a look at those in your own time, and hopefully it'll be interesting to see. The step-by-step on those. Contextual realities. This relates to everything we observed while we were there. So the way this works is throughout the visit, we would see things. We saw what we call peculiarities. So these were one-offs, and we saw universals that we would see in multiple households. And this is capturing the universals. So this is where we saw it in multiple households. And this is, I think, really powerful because it shows more than anything. It shows more than anything what we call the hidden logic of everyday life. And essentially that's why do people do what they do. You might sometimes visit houses and think, I just don't understand why this is happening. Well, actually, the attempt here is to kind of explain that and to go into, I would say, a decent amount of detail around some of the quirky things that people do, and even some of the reasons why people actually switch. Because often I think it's easy to think, oh, somebody was looking at this appliance for a long time and they were really considering it. But actually, often we notice that the trigger to purchase is a change in the fuel price, is the husband saying, actually, no, today's the day that we will become an electric household. We will get the electric pressure cooker. So it's actually a lot more fragmented in terms of reasons than you might imagine. But I will leave people to digest this. And it's worth saying that each of these pages is a standalone read. So although you have my voiceover today, actually these can all be, I hope, understood without me. Though please do reach out if you would like any further explanations. Power users. So this is people who are using the electric pressure cooker a lot. So this is people typically who are using it for 80+% of their meals, either as a standalone or are using it with gas. So we've characterized, and if I just take Alex as a good example. So this is participant A, Alex. He had previously transitioned from, he had a gas cooker. He was living in a single room abode, and he transitioned from a gas cooker to just an EPC, and he used it for every single meal in his week, breakfast, lunch and dinner. He's the extreme of extreme users. You don't usually see people like that, but he was only using that. And it was really interesting looking at some of the meals and some of the ways that he was using it. But then actually there were 4 or 5 other participants who were using it for 90-something% of their meals. So we've, in this section, just characterized them a little bit more, so you can see, well, what is it about them, what makes them different, and hopefully, you know, we want clean cooking to be available for everyone, but actually these people are, we would say, more likely than most to adopt the EPC and use it a decent amount. We always include a summary of our findings. So there's 8 findings here. I did touch on some of these at the start in my slides, but that's just I think a neat way of summarizing the 15 or so artifacts that we have before. So I won't go into detail on that, but I just wanted to touch on the future solutions. So I mentioned we're quite big advocates of we know so much because of the intensity of these conversations. What is it we would suggest? And actually, we think that, for example, there's an opportunity in the communications around pressure cookers to really push this idea of perfect every time. We heard it in at least 3 of the interviews, and this is specifically relating to the cooking consistency of hard cereals, but it's also interestingly around taste. And this manifests both in terms of taste of vegetables, but also we were hearing that little babies and little kids were absolutely loving the texture and the taste of of vegetables that were made in the pressure cooker. So that was quite a surprising learning, and we thought, you know, that could be a really interesting one to mention, maybe a surprising one. On manual pressure cookers, so it's worth saying this was not a market study. We were speaking to people who had what we call cross the void, so they were adopters of the products, but when we asked them about how they're viewed in their community and how their friends view them having this electric pressure cooker, it's interesting that we learned that a lot of people say, oh, my friends would never get a pressure cooker because of the manual pressure cooker, that explosion and the noise. And so we thought it was interesting that there's still this perception that because it's called a pressure cooker, it's very similar to a manual pressure cooker, when in reality, we can tell you from the observations that this is a very precise, very safe appliance and very, very different. And it's something that you can genuinely set and forget, whereas the manual pressure cooker is quite different. Big thing I would say is getting people's confidence higher in using them. That's something I know, I said this earlier, this is something that the sector is doing a really good job of. So this is absolutely supporting that more than anything. And then, yeah, finally, just some specific thoughts and some specific ideas on optimizations, just so it's as useful as possible, hopefully, to everyone. And the final thing I want to say is the napkin sketches. So we have actually taken it even a step further, and we've worked with an individual who has helped us sketch up how the pressure cooker could be reimagined in line with what we heard, and this is at a segment level. So yeah, so that's everything I wanted to kind of take you through in terms of the portal.